The morning my husband left, the dishwasher was running. It was just after 6. The twins were asleep in their bassinets by the window, wrapped in pale yellow blankets. I remember the hum of the machine, the faint smell of coffee I hadn't finished, the light coming through the blinds in thin, quiet lines. Evan stood near the door with his coat already on. He didn't yell, he didn't pace. He just said, very evenly, "My mother thinks this isn't the life I'm supposed to have." I waited for the rest of it. He looked tired, not angry, not emotional, just resolved. "She says I need to think long-term, about the company, about the family name." The twins shifted in their sleep. One of them made a small sound. I remember adjusting the blanket without looking away from him. "And what do you think?" I asked. He didn't answer that. Instead, he said, "I can't keep fighting her." Not, "I don't love you." Not, "I'm unhappy." Just that. I felt something settle inside me. Not panic, not screaming, just a kind of stillness. Behind him, his car was already running. He said he'd make sure we were taken care of. He said it twice, like repetition could soften it. Then he picked up his bag. There are moments when you expect yourself to collapse. I didn't. I stood there holding a burp cloth in one hand, watching him close the door behind him. I listened to his car pull away. Then I walked to the window and watched the street empty. 3 weeks later, I would receive a certified envelope with his mother's law firm printed across the top. But that morning, it was just the dishwasher, the twins, and silence. I put the phone face down, and I started the day. I met Evan almost 5 years earlier in Portland. I had just moved there for a junior interior design position. I was 27, living in a small apartment above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon before sunrise. He came into the firm as a client's son, quiet, observant, hands always folded like he was listening to something deeper than the conversation. He didn't introduce himself as the son of Robert Whitaker. He just said, "I'm Evan." Later, I learned his family owned Whitaker Development Group, commercial real estate across the West Coast, hotels, office towers, investment properties, the kind of business that carries its last name like a title. But in those early months, he was simply thoughtful. He noticed small things. He brought me tea when I worked late. He asked about my mother's arthritis. He stood close without crowding. When we got engaged, his mother, Lorraine Whitaker, sent flowers, white lilies, expensive, formal. She didn't attend the small dinner we had to celebrate. "She's just traditional," Evan told me once, adjusting his cufflinks before a family event. "She needs time." The first time I met her properly was at a fundraising gala in Seattle. The hotel ballroom smelled like polished wood and perfume. Waiters moved silently with trays of champagne. Lorraine stood near the center of the room in a silver dress that didn't crease when she sat. She shook my hand with both of hers. "You're very creative?" she said, after I mentioned my work. It wasn't an insult. It wasn't a compliment either. I smiled. "Thank you." She studied me the way someone studies a contract before signing. That night, in the car, Evan was quiet. "She just worries about perception," he said eventually. "The company has expectations." I looked out the window at the dark highway lights passing by in steady intervals. I didn't feel unwelcome. Not exactly. Just evaluated. When I found out I was pregnant, Evan lifted me off the kitchen floor and laughed. "2?" he said, staring at the ultrasound. "We're having 2?" He looked genuinely overwhelmed. Happy. He talked about converting the guest room. He researched cribs at midnight. He told me he'd work fewer hours. Lorraine called the next day. Her voice was smooth, calm. "I assume you understand what this means," she said. "For us?" I asked. "For the future?" I didn't fully understand what she meant then. But over the next months, Evan's phone lit up constantly. Private meetings, late dinners, sudden trips to Seattle. He stopped discussing work details with me. He said it was complicated. When I was 8 months pregnant, Lorraine invited us to the Whitaker estate for what she called a necessary conversation. The house overlooked the sound, wide windows, stone floors that echoed when you walked. Lorraine poured tea herself. She placed the cup in front of me and said, without looking up, "You're asking my son to choose a very small life." I didn't respond immediately. "I'm not asking him to choose anything," I said finally. She met my eyes then. "Every choice costs something." Evan stared at the floor. On the drive home, neither of us spoke. The twins were born in early spring. Evan held them carefully, almost formally, like they were something precious he wasn't sure he deserved to touch. He smiled for photos, sent them to his father, avoided forwarding them to his mother. 3 weeks later, the dishwasher was running, and he left. That afternoon, after I fed the twins and settled them back to sleep, I opened my laptop and looked at our shared bank account. It was nearly empty. I checked again. Then I opened the business account tied to his salary deposits. Closed. No warning, no message, just numbers that no longer belonged to me. I didn't cry. I opened a spreadsheet instead. Then I waited. I didn't tell anyone the first day. Not my friends from the firm. Not my neighbor downstairs who had already offered to bring soup when the twins arrived. Not even my older sister back in Ohio, who would have gotten on a plane without asking questions. I kept moving through the hours the way you do when you're responsible for 2 tiny people who don't care what your marriage looks like. They just need you. Milk, warmth, clean diapers, a steady voice. That night, after I finally got both of them sleeping at the same time, I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open and my phone beside it. The screen glow made everything look colder than it was. I could still hear the dishwasher. I realized it had run twice that day because I kept loading things without thinking. I started by writing down the basics: rent due date, utilities, insurance, grocery average, diapers, formula, just in case my supply dropped from stress. Then I opened my email and typed Evan's name in the search bar. There were years of little receipts and confirmations, flights, hotel bookings, dinner reservations he'd made, things that looked normal until you read them back to back and start noticing patterns. The trips that happened right after he'd been with his mother. The meetings that always seemed to land on days when I had prenatal appointments. At around 2 a.m, I finally texted him. "I need to understand what happened. Please respond." It showed delivered. No reply. I stared at that tiny word for a long time, like it could change if I stared hard enough. Then I put the phone face down and went to check on the twins. The certified envelope arrived 3 weeks later, like I'd remembered. It was a Tuesday. Rainy. The kind of morning where the building hallway smells damp and the mail feels heavier than paper should. The return address was a downtown Seattle law office. Neat, formal, one of those names carved into a brass plaque. Inside was a letter with my name spelled correctly and my address typed precisely, as if someone had double-checked it. It wasn't written by Lorraine herself. It was signed by an attorney. It said Evan had temporarily relocated to focus on family and business obligations. It said support would be arranged at the appropriate time, and all communication should go through their office. There was also a document clipped behind it, a proposed separation agreement, not filed yet, but drafted like it was already inevitable. I read it twice without moving. It included language about confidentiality, about public statements, about not contacting affiliated parties, about restrictions that would have made my life smaller than it already was. At the bottom was a section for child support. Blank. No numbers, no timeline, just placeholders and vague phrasing. I didn't feel shocked. I felt managed, like I had been moved from wife to problem, and now I was being processed. I folded the letter back into the envelope, set it on the table, and made myself a cup of tea I didn't want. Then I called a family law clinic I found through a local women's resource directory. The receptionist asked gently, "Is this urgent?" I looked at the twins' bassinets. their little chests rising and falling. "Yes," I said. "It is." A week later, I sat in a small office across from a woman named Marisol, who wore simple glasses and had a calm way of listening that made me speak more clearly. She didn't ask me how I felt. She asked me for facts. "Legally married?" "Yes." "Both names on the lease?" "Only mine." "Any joint accounts?" "We did. They're not accessible now." "Any written promises? Emails? Texts?" "One text where he said he'd make sure we're taken care of." "Good. Save it. Screenshot it. Email it to yourself." She slid a yellow legal pad across the table and drew 3 columns: assets, income sources, control points. "Lorraine is trying to control the story," she said. "They usually do. Don't help her." I nodded. Marisol explained what I already suspected. Support wasn't something they could arrange when appropriate. There were rules, timelines, obligations, especially with newborns. She also explained something else, very plainly. "You need to assume they're watching what you do," she said. "Not because you're doing anything wrong, because they want leverage." Leverage. That word stayed with me. I drove home with the twins in their car seats, the rain streaking the windshield, and I didn't feel afraid. I felt organized. In the weeks that followed, I lived by simple routines. Feed the twins, put them down, work in small blocks of time, answer emails, document everything. I started keeping a folder on my computer labeled Timeline. Not emotional notes, just dates. The day Evan left, the day the account went empty, the day the certified letter arrived, every attempted contact. I saved the envelope itself, took photos of the postmark, scanned the letter, backed it up in 2 places. Marisol had said, "If you can't control people, control the paper." So I did. I tried returning to my old interior design firm. My previous manager sounded sympathetic, but her tone had shifted into the careful voice people use when they don't want to promise anything. "We really loved your work," she said, "but your position was filled while you were out. I'm so sorry." I applied to other firms anyway. Most didn't respond. A few did, and when they heard newborn twins, the conversation cooled. One recruiter said it kindly, like she was offering advice. "You're talented, but these roles require flexibility. Late nights, on-site client meetings. It's just tough." I didn't argue. I thanked her and kept going. At night, when the twins finally slept, I took small freelance jobs online. Space planning, mood boards, furniture sourcing lists, anything someone would pay for without needing me in an office. The pay was inconsistent, but it was something I controlled, and control mattered. Around that time, I noticed something else. Evan's name still appeared on certain shared subscriptions, but the payment method had changed. A streaming service. A cloud storage account I didn't recognize at first. I clicked into the account settings and saw an email address I didn't know. Not his work email, not the personal one I had always used. A new address. I didn't try to log into it. I didn't send anything. I just took a screenshot and added it to the folder. Then I called Marisol and told her what I'd found. "Good," she said. "Don't touch it. Just document it. That's a breadcrumb." A breadcrumb. I started to understand that this whole situation wasn't just about Evan leaving. It was about how cleanly they wanted him removed, how quietly they wanted me contained. The first time I saw Lorraine after he left was at a distance. It was outside a charity event downtown. I wasn't attending. I was walking past with the twins in a stroller, trying to get fresh air. The city smelled like wet pavement and street coffee. I saw her step out of a black car with tinted windows. 2 women followed her, both holding small purses like uniform pieces. She laughed at something one of them said. Then her eyes flicked toward me. Not surprise, not guilt, recognition, like she'd spotted a loose thread. She didn't approach, she didn't wave. She simply turned her head and continued walking, as if I was an object in the background. I kept pushing the stroller. I didn't speed up. I didn't slow down. But I felt something settle again in that same quiet way. The decision was already made on both sides. A month later, another envelope arrived. This one wasn't certified. It was thicker. Inside were printed screenshots, photos of my social media posts from years ago, a few travel pictures, a post where I had joked about being broke after college, a comment thread where a friend had teased me about dating a quiet rich guy. They had highlighted certain lines in yellow marker. At the bottom was a short note from the law office. These materials may become relevant should this proceed to court. No threat in bold letters, no dramatic language, just pressure, delivered neatly. I sat with the papers spread out on the table while the twins napped. My hands didn't shake. I looked at the highlighted lines and realized what they were trying to do. They weren't trying to prove I was a bad mother. They were trying to make me look unstable, unreliable, careless, like someone who couldn't be trusted with narrative control. I gathered the pages into a stack, slid them back into the envelope, and wrote the date on the front with a pen. Then I opened my laptop and made a new folder. Attempts to intimidate. I scanned everything, and then, very calmly, I opened a fresh document and wrote, Step 1. Stop posting anything personal online. Step 2. Lock every account. Change every password. Step 3. Communicate only through counsel. Step 4. Build income that can't be shut off by one phone call. When the twins woke up, I fed them, held them, and didn't mention any of it. That night, after the apartment was quiet again, I received a text from an unknown number. It was one line. Evan wants to see the babies. We should discuss terms. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I didn't reply. I set the phone down, and I opened my timeline folder. I didn't respond to the unknown number. Not that night, not the next morning. Silence, I was beginning to understand, wasn't avoidance. It was positioning. Instead, I forwarded the message to Marisol with a simple note. Received at 9:42 p.m. No prior contact. She replied an hour later. Good. Do not engage directly. We'll formalize visitation through court. Keep documenting. So I did. The following week, we filed for temporary child support and structured visitation. Not emotional arguments. Not long letters. Just paperwork. Income disclosures. Bank statements. A copy of the empty account. The certified letter. The highlighted social media packet. Every document had a date. Every date had a timestamp. Marisol moved through it all with steady efficiency. The court cares about patterns, she reminded me, not feelings. I appreciated that. Feelings can be dismissed, patterns cannot. 2 weeks later, Evan finally appeared, through counsel. His attorney requested supervised visitation to begin rebuilding paternal connection. The language was clinical, controlled, as if fatherhood were a project that needed reactivation. I agreed to structured visits in a neutral setting, not because I trusted him, because I trusted process. The first visit took place in a small family services office downtown. Beige walls, soft toys in the corner, a woman with a clipboard observing quietly from a desk. Evan arrived 10 minutes early. He looked thinner, tired around the eyes. He didn't reach for me. He didn't apologize. He looked at the twins like he was studying something fragile and distant. Hi, he said softly. Hi, I replied. That was it. He held them awkwardly at first, one at a time, like he was afraid they might break. They didn't cry. They didn't smile either. They were too young to recognize absence. The supervisor took notes. I noticed everything. The way Evan kept glancing at his phone. The way he avoided using certain words. The way he never mentioned his mother. When the hour ended, he handed them back without argument. Thank you for letting me see them, he said. I'm following the court order, I answered. No anger, just fact. That evening, I opened the timeline folder and added another entry. Supervised visitation number 1, no incident, no direct communication outside scope. Then I did something else. I opened the freelance interior design platform where I'd been taking small projects and adjusted my profile. Not emotionally, strategically. I updated my portfolio photos. I raised my rates slightly. I narrowed my services to specialized nursery and family space design. If I was going to rebuild income, I needed a niche. Something aligned with my actual life. Something no one could easily discredit. Around that same time, I noticed small deposits entering my account. Child support, court-ordered, not generous, not symbolic either. Precise. It wasn't coming directly from Evan. It was processed through payroll at Whitaker Development, which meant Lorraine was aware of every dollar. Good. I preferred transparency. One afternoon, about a month into the structured visits, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't threatening. It was brief. You may want to reconsider how aggressively you're approaching this. Cooperation benefits everyone. No signature, no firm name, just that sentence. I read it twice. Then I checked the header metadata. It routed through a private corporate server associated with Whitaker Development. Not a mistake. Not anonymous enough. I forwarded it to Marisol. Her reply came quickly. Do not respond. This helps us. Helps us. That was the first moment I understood something clearly. They expected me to be overwhelmed. They expected emotion. They expected silence out of fear. They didn't expect record keeping. A week later, during supervised visitation number 4, Evan arrived without his wedding ring. I hadn't noticed before whether he was wearing it. This time I did. He held our son a little longer, his voice softer. My mom thinks this can still be handled privately, he said quietly, while the supervisor stepped out briefly to retrieve a form. I'm not handling anything privately, I replied. He looked at me carefully. You've changed. No, I said. I've organized. He didn't argue. For a moment, I saw something shift in his expression. Not defiance. Recognition. The real shift came 2 months later. Marisol called me mid-afternoon. I need you to come by the office, she said. Bring every document you have. Her tone wasn't urgent. It was focused. I packed the binder I'd created. Yes, a physical binder now, with printed copies of everything. Screenshots, letters, court filings, financial statements, visitation logs. When I arrived, Marisol had another stack waiting. Subpoenaed financial disclosures from Whitaker Development, executive compensation statements, bonus structures, deferred stock options, and something else. A trust arrangement. One that had been quietly modified 3 months before Evan left. Modified to reduce his direct liquid income while increasing discretionary distributions through a family-controlled trust. Which meant the reduced salary argument their attorney had made in court wasn't entirely accurate. It wasn't illegal, but it wasn't transparent either. Marisol tapped the page lightly. They tried to shrink his visible income, she said, but they forgot something. What? I asked. Trust distributions are still considered when calculating support, especially if there's control. Control. That word again. Lorraine controlled the trust, which meant Lorraine indirectly controlled the narrative about what Evan could afford. I felt something settle inside me once more. Not anger, clarity. That night, after the twins were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with the binder open in front of me. The apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator humming. I ran my finger down the numbers. Dates, transfers, adjustments. Step 1. Do not confront emotionally. Step 2. Let the court address discrepancies. Step 3. Continue building independent income. Step 4. Keep every interaction documented. I closed the binder gently. Then I made tea and waited. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in early fall. By then, the twins were sitting up on their own. They had started reaching for things, grabbing at my sleeves, pulling themselves toward light. I remember buckling them into their car seats before leaving them with my neighbor, Mrs. Halpern. Her apartment always smelled like lemon cleaner and toasted bread. She squeezed my hand before I left. "You're steady," she said quietly. "That matters." I nodded and drove downtown. The courthouse was cooler than I expected. Neutral walls, low voices, the sound of heels clicking across tile. Evan was already seated at the table with his attorney. He wore a navy suit I'd seen before. His posture was straight, composed. Lorraine was seated behind him, not at the table. Behind him, hands folded neatly in her lap. She met my eyes once. No smile, no frown, just observation. Marisol placed our binder on the table in front of us. She didn't rush. She didn't whisper strategy. We had already reviewed everything. When the judge entered, the room shifted slightly. Everyone stood. Then we sat. The first half of the hearing followed expected lines. Evan's attorney spoke calmly about temporary adjustments in income, about business volatility, about the importance of preserving corporate stability. It was measured, professional. Then Marisol stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply referenced documents. She handed copies forward. Page numbers, dates, trust amendments, distribution schedules. She explained how compensation had been restructured immediately before separation, how discretionary funds were being routed differently. The judge flipped through the pages slowly. Lorraine shifted in her seat. Not dramatically, just slightly. Marisol finished with one sentence. Support calculations should reflect actual access to resources, not temporarily adjusted payroll figures. Then she sat down. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just deliberate. The judge asked Evan directly, "Do you dispute these trust distributions?" Evan hesitated. He glanced briefly over his shoulder. Then he said, "No, Your Honor." It wasn't defiant. It wasn't defeated. It was factual. And that changed the room. The ruling wasn't dramatic. There was no gavel slam, just numbers recalculated on the record. Adjusted temporary support based on total available income, including trust access. Structured visitation remained in place. No expansion yet. The judge cited stability for infants. Court adjourned. That was it. Lorraine stood immediately and walked out without speaking. Evan remained seated for a moment longer. Then he turned toward me. "You didn't have to make it public," he said quietly. "It was already legal," I replied. He didn't argue. He looked tired again, older than he should have. "I didn't know she adjusted the trust like that," he said. I believed him. It didn't change anything. "Then you should start reading what you sign," I said gently. Then I gathered the binder and walked out. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter. Not triumphant, just clearer. For the first time since he left, the system had acknowledged something concrete. Not my pain, not Lorraine's control, just numbers. And numbers are hard to manipulate when they're documented. The escalation didn't end there. 2 weeks later, Marisol received a formal request from Whitaker Development's legal department. They wanted mediation, private, off-record. To reduce further exposure, I considered it carefully. Mediation wasn't weakness, it was structure. So I agreed, with conditions. Step 1. All financial disclosures updated in full. Step 2. Clear visitation schedule filed with the court. Step 3. No confidentiality clauses restricting my right to speak about my own experience. Marisol relayed the terms. There was resistance, especially to the third condition. Lorraine, I was told, valued discretion. I valued autonomy. After several back-and-forth drafts, they agreed. The mediation took place in a quiet conference room overlooking the river. Long table, filtered light, bottled water placed precisely at each seat. Lorraine spoke first. "I assume this isn't how you envisioned your life," she said. "It wasn't cruel. It wasn't kind either." "I'm building it as it is," I replied. She folded her hands. "You could have accepted a private settlement," she continued, "without the scrutiny." "I'm not afraid of scrutiny," I said calmly. "I'm afraid of instability. Evan watched the exchange carefully. Lorraine shifted to numbers, proposals, structured asset allocation, educational funds for the twins, insurance guarantees, all very proper, all very controlled. I listened. Then I asked one question. If Evan chooses to reduce his involvement in the company in the future, will these arrangements remain intact? Lorraine paused. Evan looked at her. That was the first time I saw tension between them that wasn't about me. It would depend, she said slowly. Then I need guarantees independent of corporate position, I replied. No emotion, just terms. The mediator wrote notes. Evan spoke then. She's right, he said quietly. Lorraine didn't respond, but something shifted again. Not loud, just structural. That night, after the twins were asleep, I sat on the living room floor assembling new shelving units for their growing toys. The house was quiet except for the soft clicking of screws fitting into place. My phone buzzed. A text from Evan. I didn't realize how much she managed until today. I stared at it. Then I typed back, "You're responsible for what you allow." No accusation, just fact. He didn't respond. I put the phone down and finished tightening the last screw. A few days later, an unexpected email arrived, not from Whitaker Development, from a journalist. She was researching generational wealth control in family-run corporations. She mentioned court filings as public record. She asked if I'd be willing to speak, off background, about navigating separation within a powerful family system. I read the email slowly. I wasn't seeking exposure, but I also wasn't seeking silence. I forwarded it to Marisol. She called me an hour later. "This is your choice," she said. "But understand, visibility changes leverage." I looked around my living room. Toy blocks on the rug. A half-folded blanket on the couch. A life rebuilt piece by piece. Leverage. I didn't answer the journalist immediately. Instead, I opened a new document and began outlining facts. Then I waited. I didn't respond to the journalist right away. Visibility is a tool. So is restraint. Instead, I requested one more mediation session. Not to argue, to clarify. The second mediation was scheduled on a Monday morning. Same conference room. Same filtered light through tall windows. The river moving quietly outside, steady and indifferent. Lorraine arrived first this time. She wore a soft gray suit, minimal jewelry, her posture as precise as ever. Evan came in a few minutes later. No tie, slight stubble. He looked less rehearsed. The mediator opened the folder and reviewed the updated draft agreement. Financial support had been recalculated properly. Educational trusts for the twins were structured independently of Evan's corporate role, just as I'd requested. Insurance policies named them directly as beneficiaries. On paper, it looked balanced, but paper can still leave room for control. So I asked for one more clarification. If Evan chooses to step away from Whitaker Development entirely, I said, keeping my tone level, will there be any clauses that allow the family trust to alter the children's financial provisions? Lorraine's eyes flicked up. That would be a drastic decision, she said calmly. I'm asking about structure, I replied, not likelihood. Silence held for a moment. The mediator looked between us. Evan spoke before his mother did. There shouldn't be, he said. If this is about the kids, it shouldn't depend on me staying. Lorraine turned toward him slowly. You're being impulsive, she said, not raising her voice. I'm being clear, he answered. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was the first time he had spoken in direct opposition to her in front of others. The mediator wrote something down. Lorraine adjusted her hands in her lap. We can structure it independently, she said finally, just like that. Not an apology, not a concession, a correction. After a few more revisions, the agreement was finalized, filed with the court, stamped, signed. The numbers were solid, the visitation schedule defined, the children's provisions protected from corporate leverage. There was no victory speech, no emotional collapse, just signatures. When it was done, I closed the binder gently. Evan waited until Lorraine stepped out of the room before speaking. "I didn't understand how much was arranged behind the scenes," he said quietly. I looked at him for a moment. "You didn't ask," I replied. He nodded. "That's fair." It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't forgiveness either. It was acknowledgement. 2 weeks later, the journalist followed up. I agreed to speak under one condition: no sensational framing, no character attacks, only process. We met in a small cafe near the river. The smell of roasted coffee beans hung in the air. The chairs were mismatched wood, quiet enough to talk without raising our voices. She asked about power, about leverage, about navigating separation when money is structured through layers of control. I answered carefully. "I didn't fight a person," I said. "I followed the rules." She nodded. "And how did that feel?" "Stable," I said. She didn't push for drama. She didn't ask about betrayal in emotional terms. We discussed documentation, legal timelines, the importance of reading what you sign. When the article came out 3 weeks later, it wasn't explosive. It was measured. It discussed generational wealth systems. It mentioned a young mother who prioritized structure over reaction. It didn't name Lorraine directly. It didn't shame Evan. It focused on process. But people read it, and they understood. The real confrontation happened unexpectedly. It was during a scheduled visitation exchange. Evan had begun transitioning to unsupervised short visits, as outlined in the agreement. He arrived at my home to pick up the twins for the afternoon. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. I handed him the diaper bag, already packed with bottles and snacks. He hesitated at the doorway. "She read the article," he said. "I assumed she would," I replied. "She thinks you're trying to damage the company." I didn't mention the company. He shifted his weight slightly. "She doesn't like that people are asking questions." I met his eyes evenly. "Questions aren't damage." He exhaled. "She asked me to convince you to stop speaking publicly." "I'm not speaking publicly," I said. "I spoke once, about legal structure." He looked at the twins, then back at me. "She's afraid of losing control." I didn't respond immediately. Then I said something simple. "That's not my responsibility." He nodded slowly. "I know." There was no argument, no raised voices, just clarity. He took the twins gently and walked toward his car. I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, not exhausted, just aware that something fundamental had shifted. That evening, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. This time, it wasn't legal, it wasn't corporate, it was Lorraine. "I'd like to meet," the message read, privately. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I opened the agreement once more, reviewed the clauses, the visitation schedule, the financial provisions. Everything was secured. Then I replied, "Public place, 1 hour, no revisions to the agreement." Her response came quickly. "Understood." The meeting was set for Friday, at noon. I placed the phone face down and began preparing my notes. We met at a quiet hotel restaurant downtown, not one of the Whitaker properties, neutral ground. The lunch crowd was thin, soft piano music played somewhere near the bar, the air smelled faintly of lemon and polished wood. Lorraine was already seated when I arrived. She stood as I approached. That was new. "Thank you for coming," she said. I sat down. "You asked." A server brought water. Neither of us touched it. For a moment, she simply observed me, the way she had the first night we met, measured, evaluating. But there was something different now, less certainty. "I miscalculated you," she said finally. I didn't answer. She folded her hands on the table. I assumed you would accept a quiet settlement. I believed pressure would encourage compliance. Her tone wasn't apologetic. It was analytical. You believed I would prioritize comfort over structure? I said. Yes. And when I didn't? She looked toward the window briefly. I underestimated your tolerance for process. I nodded once. That's accurate. There was no hostility in the exchange, just plain acknowledgement. She continued. You should understand something. The trust restructuring was intended to protect the company, not to punish you. It still affected my children, I replied calmly. Yes, she said. It did. The admission hung between us. She reached into her handbag and removed a thin folder. I've authorized an independent educational endowment for the twins, she said. Irrevocable. Outside corporate oversight. She slid the folder across the table. I didn't open it immediately. Why? I asked. Because stability benefits everyone, she said. It was the closest she would come to saying she had gone too far. I opened the folder slowly. The documents were clean, not drafts, filed and executed. The trust administrator was independent. The funding schedule was fixed. No discretionary clauses, no corporate review rights. I read each page carefully. Then I looked up. This doesn't change custody, I said. I'm aware, she replied. This doesn't silence me. I'm aware. This doesn't repair what happened. She held my gaze. No, she said quietly. It doesn't. We sat in silence for a few seconds. Then she said something I hadn't expected. You're stronger than I was at your age. I didn't take it as praise, just data. I didn't have your options, she added. That sentence told me more than the rest. Generational control doesn't start in one lifetime. It repeats, unless someone stops it. I closed the folder. I'm not interested in fighting you, I said. I'm interested in predictability. She gave a small nod. That, at least, we can agree on. We stood at the same time. No handshake, no embrace. Just a quiet ending to something that had once been loud beneath the surface. When I walked out of the hotel, the air felt steady, not victorious, balanced. The official resolution came 2 weeks later. The court finalized the revised support order incorporating full trust disclosures. The independent educational endowment was formally acknowledged but not tied to custody. The visitation schedule remained structured, gradually expanding as the twins grew older. There were no dramatic consequences, no public scandal, no collapse of Whittaker development, just legal clarity. Evan began seeing the twins regularly. He showed up on time. He read the parenting guidelines the court recommended. He stopped glancing at his phone during visits. He never asked to come back. I never offered. Our communication became procedural. Pick up at 10, drop off at 4, medical update attached, school enrollment form signed. We didn't argue. We didn't reminisce. We parented, within structure. Lorraine stopped contacting me directly. The journalist piece circulated quietly through business circles. It wasn't explosive, but it shifted conversations. I received emails from other women navigating similar family systems. One message stayed with me. I didn't know I could say no without screaming. I replied with 3 words. You can document. One evening, months later, Evan arrived to return the twins after a weekend visit. They ran toward the house, laughing, holding small paper crafts they had made. He lingered by the walkway. I'm stepping down, he said. From the company? Yes. I studied his expression, not defiant, not impulsive, clear. I can't undo what happened, he continued, but I can choose differently now. I nodded once. That's your decision. He looked at the house, at the garden I'd planted, at the lights glowing softly through the windows. You built this, he said. Yes, I replied. There was no tension, just truth. He didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't offer judgment. He left quietly. And that was enough. The final confirmation arrived in the mail a month later. Not from Lorraine. From the Independent Trust Administrator. Annual statements. Fully funded. Irrevocable. Predictable. I placed the document in the binder one last time. Then I closed it. The folder labeled Attempts to Intimidate remained untouched for weeks. There was nothing new to add, and that, in itself, was resolution. This morning, the house was quiet in the way I've come to appreciate. Not empty, just settled. The twins, now 5, were at the kitchen table arguing gently over who got the blue cup. The sunlight came in across the counter in soft squares. The coffee machine clicked off behind me. I wiped down the table slowly while they negotiated their own system. 1 blue cup today, 1 tomorrow. Fairness, in simple forms. After breakfast, I walked them to school. The air carried that clean, early spring chill, backpacks slightly too big for their shoulders. They ran ahead, then turned back to make sure I was still there. I always am. When I returned home, I sat at my desk and reviewed quarterly reports for my design studio. What started as freelance nursery layouts has grown into a small, steady firm specializing in functional family spaces. 2 employees, a contractor on retainer, clients who come through referrals, not advertising. I don't rush anymore. I schedule. I review. I respond. Around noon, I opened a drawer and pulled out the old binder. I don't look at it often. The tabs are still labeled timeline, financial disclosures, visitation logs, trust amendments. It's not a symbol of anger. It's a record of order. I flipped to the very first page, the date Evan left, the nearly empty account, the certified envelope. Then I closed it. Not because it hurts, but because it's complete. Evan still sees the children regularly. He rents a modest townhouse now. He consults for smaller firms. He shows up to parent-teacher conferences. He doesn't speak about his mother in front of them. Lorraine sends birthday gifts, appropriate ones, neutral. We exchange polite messages twice a year regarding school matters tied to the educational trust. No personal commentary, no pressure. That's the boundary. Sometimes people expect a dramatic ending, a public apology, a reconciliation, a grand regret. Life rarely works like that. What we have instead is structure. The twins know they are loved. They know their schedule. They know that when something feels uncertain, we write it down and talk through it. That's the inheritance I care about. Last week, I received an email from a woman in Denver. She wrote that her husband's family had quietly shifted assets after she filed for divorce. She felt overwhelmed, embarrassed, outmatched. She asked one question: where do I even begin? I didn't send her a long speech. I sent her a short list. Step 1, gather every document. Step 2, stop reacting emotionally in writing. Step 3, consult someone who understands financial structures, not just divorce. Step 4, keep a timeline. Step 5, don't confuse silence with weakness. Then I made tea and went to pick up my children from school. Tonight, after dinner, I'll fold laundry while they tell me about their day. I'll pack lunches for tomorrow. I'll check the calendar. I'll water the small herb garden by the kitchen window. Nothing dramatic, just life. And sometimes, when the house is still, I think about that morning years ago, the dishwasher running, the quiet street, the car pulling away. I don't feel anger. I don't feel triumph. I feel gratitude for the moment I chose order over chaos, because that decision changed everything. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt quietly outmatched, I hope you remember this. You don't have to shout to take control. You don't have to win loudly to win well. Sometimes you just document, organize, and wait. If this story resonated with you, gently tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Tell me your city and what time it is there right now. It always amazes me how far these stories travel. 2 more stories will be appearing on your screen next, both about people who chose structure over panic in moments that could have gone very differently. Until next time, take care of your peace.